Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lindsay and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello again, everybody. Hi, Kim. How are you?
I am well. Thanks, Mark. How are you?
Everything is great.
Good.
Every week, Kim and I are here on Franklin Radio, WFPR 102.9 FM, and talking wine with our listeners. We always enjoy getting together and bringing up topics we think are interesting in the wine world. And today, Kim, we have an article that was in Drink Business that I thought was interesting because it talks about how to calculate how much wine you need when you're having a party. And I'm sure, Kim, like myself, you have seen some formulas in the past in the industry that you
and I have one that I use myself.
All right, so great, because I brought my old fail-safe and
great.
And, in this article, they use the formula that they call the fail-safe formula, created by Bon Appetit. And I guess we'll start with that. So they said you have to take your number of guests times the estimated number of glasses per person, divide that by 4, and that's the number of bottles you will need. So number of guests times the estimated glasses per person would drink, divide by 4, and that's the number of bottles. So when I first saw this formula, I'm thinking, okay, how do we estimate glasses per person? And they had an interesting take on how you estimate a glass per person. Did you see that, Kim?
I did.
So one before dinner, they're assuming now that a guest would have one glass before dinner, and a quote, few during dinner, another after dinner. So to me, Kim, that calculates out to one guest would probably drink a bottle of wine with that formula. Did you think that's an accurate assumption of consumption?
You know, this is a really hard thing to estimate. And it's been something that I've been trying to figure out literally since I was planning my wedding. How do you figure out how much wine to have for a party? But not just wine. Like, what if you also have beer? What if you also have cocktails? What if you also have a mimosa bar like I had at a party this past summer? How do you figure out what to have and how much to have? And it's not really an easy calculation. And I think that this is a good first step, but I don't think that it necessarily helps you with the nuances of if you have multiple types of beverages. So I think that people will have a glass of wine before dinner, a couple of glasses with dinner, and then let's bet that they will have another one after dinner, which really does work out to a bottle of wine per person. And this might not be any worse of a calculation of how much people are going to consume than your rule of thumb or my rule of thumb. But I really think that it does sort of lead you to, well, there's no necessarily right answer for this conundrum that we run into when we entertain.
It is difficult. So a lot of people ask that, how much do I need? And then
I get the question all the time. And I can imagine folks like caterers or reception facilities get this question all the time. And I feel like they would be the ones to know.
Yeah, and it's tough. And I don't know how people could honestly feel good when they give you a number. Because like you said, we're going to talk obviously about calculating for wine for your guests. But like you said, Kim, there's people that will be drinking beer at your party. They'll be drinking liquor at your party. It's not even talking about how much white, how much red, how much sparkling. We're just talking an estimated wine number. And then you have to factor in, which I always tell people when they're kind of guessing of what amount they need. Someone's going to bring something too. So now you're going to add what they bring to what you're giving them. And you have to work that into the consumption part as well. So let's just use that formula that we talked about, number of guests. So say we have 10 guests, estimate they have 5 glasses of wine. So that would be 50, right? Divided by 4, right? It's like 12 and a half bottles.
Yeah. So you're looking at a case of wine.
For 10 guests. And they're saying also, as a side note, calculate for extra guests. So case and a half, say, of wine, right?
But then you're going to have some people who drink a little bit less and some people who drink a little bit more. So I do think that it works out unless you know that you have a crowd that will be consuming maybe a little bit more or maybe a little bit less. So I think for your situation where you're working with a smaller group of, say, 10 people, you can gauge that a little bit better, I feel, because you know who those people are. You know that Uncle Frank is probably going to drink 2 bottles just by himself, but that, I don't know, Cousin Sam is only going to have 2 glasses of wine. So I feel like for smaller groups like that, it might be a little bit easier. I think where it gets tough is where you have like a group of 50 and you don't necessarily know people's drinking habits.
So you said, Kim, you had an old formula you would use. So for 10 guests, what was your formula?
So my
see
formula
if it's similar
is
to mine.
My formula is 1 drink per person per hour, but that includes everything. So that would be cocktails, that would be wine, but it would also be like soda or
total beverages,
other stuff. So knowing that you need to have other things on hand besides alcoholic beverages, like plain water is one thing, but sparkling water or soda or lemonade or something like that. I've found that that generally works pretty well because you get to a point where, okay, you know, if it's you're 3 hours in and you're on your 4th glass of wine, you know, you're starting to get a little tired, maybe. Right. I have sort of found that that works pretty well because you do need to take into consideration how long is this event going for. If it's just an hour and a half or a 2-hour thing, people might have 3 drinks over the course of 2 hours. But if it's a 5-hour thing, they generally will not be having more than that 1 drink per person per hour.
I want to address that hour thing, but first I want to tell you I had a chart, and this was probably from, I would say it was from the old Mr. Boston book going way back or something, but it had the number of people. That was it. Just how many people are you having? And it was all wine based. And it would say for 10 people, so we'll stick with that number 10, it would say you need 4 bottles of whites, 2 bottles of red. So only 6 bottles on this chart that I had. So a lot less than the calculated 12 and a half bottles for the Bon Appetit calculation.
See, if that were Thanksgiving with my family, we would run out of wine so fast.
Yeah. So, well, that's another thing I think we should talk about because I tend to see that a lot. People, when you tell them, if I was to tell someone, I think you need a case of wine for 10 people, a lot of people would probably be like, whoa, wait a minute. You know, I'm not serving all that wine. I'm because that seems like a lot,
right?
Yeah, right. I mean, because you think about it, do we really, well, me and you do, but do people really consume 1 bottle in a sitting like that? And in how many hours? I mean, you have to think. So do you want to cut back a little bit just to make sure people don't consume too much? Or do you want to go by these charts where the suggested serving amount? So I don't know if they've been updated recently or this one they were talking about in the article is a recent calculation. I did notice in, I think it was a Pinterest infographic that did take your point about the number of hours. So it said the number of people multiplied by 2 is the glasses per hour. So if we had 10 people times 2, that would be 20 glasses per hour times the number of hours you figure you're hosting. So say we had a 4-hour party, that would be 80 glasses of wine, which would be, you'd need 16 bottles.
See, that I feel like
pretty
is too
close.
Much.
Well, 4 hours. I mean, so if you figure,
but 4 hours and 2 drinks an hour.
But we're only off by 4 bottles.
Yeah, but that's 8 drinks. That's a lot.
Well, 4 times 20 drinks by 10 people, it's 2 extra drinks a person.
Yeah, but those 2 extra drinks, you know, that's the difference between feeling happy and having a hangover.
See, well, it's funny. Now you're going the other way. Now you're saying it's too much. It's interesting. But I mean, there's so many different calculations out there. So let's take that number. Say it is a case, Kim, for 10 people. How would you break it down for reds, whites, and sparkling? Does it depend on if it's a holiday, time of year? Would you take all that into consideration?
See, that's the hard part. And for me, I always overbuy because I'm an Italian mother and I never want to run out of anything. So I would get more than those 12 bottles, honestly, because I would be afraid that, oh, maybe I'm going to get 2 bottles of sparkling wine as our appetizer-y kind of as people are gathering before we sit down to a meal or before the party really gets rolling. But what if we run out of those and we want a third bottle of that?
Right.
So I would err on the side of caution and get, say, an extra bottle or 2 of everything that I'm serving. So I probably would end up with extra wine. I just wouldn't necessarily know which wine I was going to end up with extra of. And I think that the breaking down of this much sparkling, this much white, this much red is a little bit harder to figure out than you need this total number of bottles for your event.
Yeah.
But I guess it depends on where you want to put it in your party, right? So if you have wines that are specifically going to go with dinner, you're not going to open them up until dinner is on the table. That's one thing. But if you're going to open everything at the beginning and then just let people pick and choose what they want to drink, I think that does make it a little bit harder because some people are going to want red, some people are going to want white. And the trend seems to always be changing, but there's this pretty consistent idea that reds and whites, I think, are equally popular. And I don't think that sparkling is necessarily as popular as the other 2 categories as much as I would like them to be.
Right.
Unless you're doing something like a mimosa bar, in which case that's like its own thing. So you need to make, I think, concessions for having enough of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think a good point in this article, I liked how they said assuming during the meal, before the meal, after the meal.
And that's smart too, you know, especially
pick.
if you're planning like a wedding, like you need to take into consideration, oh, there's like a reception before the actual dinner that people are going to want to have a drink or maybe 2 before they actually sit down with their meal.
And I think it definitely has to be a mix because not everybody likes red, not everybody likes white.
Right.
And it depends on what you're having for the meal. You can make a lot of people happy before the meal and after the meal with a sparkling wine or something refreshing white, because the red drink will say, I'll just wait and I'll have the red with my meal if the red is what you're pairing with the meal. So, but there is a lot to consider and people do really stress out about it. But we felt like they should really know that there are some formulas out there. Kim brought up the elephant in the room that you have to think of all beverages too. So we're trying to help you if you're having just wine calculation here, but it gets a lot more complicated if you have a beer drinker coming. What do you do if you have a bourbon drinker? Or, you know, now you're talking, you have to buy a million things and big bottles versus small bottles. How do you like buying the wine, Kim? Do you like getting a traditional 750 size when you have a party, or do you go box, or do you find
usually I do a 750
standard? Yeah. That seems to be popular now as well. More people are doing that than doing like a big bulk thing when they have people over.
Did I ever tell you the story about how much wine to buy for my wedding?
No. Were you letting them tell you, or you would say no?
No. So when we went to the reception hall that we were having our wedding, and you know, we told them how many people were coming, and they told us the amount of wine that we should order for it, which was we had just shy of 200 people, and they said 2 cases of white, 2 cases of red, 2 cases of sparkling. I'm like, that is not nearly enough wine.
6 cases.
So 6 cases of wine for 200 people for the toast and for dinner and like that kind of thing. I'm like, that is not enough. But I have to tell you, they were spot on with their numbers. We also had an open bar and beer and all that stuff too.
Wow. Then that was still a lot.
You think 6 cases was a lot for 200 people?
Open bar event. Yeah.
Oh, then there was open bar. Yeah. But as far as like, the wine went, I'm like, that's not going to be nearly enough wine. And we maybe had an extra bottle of everything, like 1 bottle of sparkling, 1 bottle of red, and 1 bottle of white left over.
They included the toast, though.
Correct. Yeah. But that's all I was drinking because we know me and Bubbles. So I probably drank 2 of those bottles just myself. But I was pleasantly surprised at how correct they were with their calculation, that they knew how many people. And they knew that, okay, because you're having an open bar and you're doing this is the amount of wine that you need. And we're like, whoa, we're a big group of Italians, you know? And they're like, nope, we got it. And they were right. So 6
total cases.
6 cases of wine.
So that's a lot. If you were to use this formula we're just talking about, 200 times, you guess what? They're going to have the toast. They're going to have maybe 1 glass with meal. So maybe 400 divided by 4. That's 100 bottles. So that's lower than that calculation would be, because you were in what? 72 bottles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
But
it
it
did
worked.
seem low. According to this formula, you would have needed, 100 bottles, right?
Yep.
So,
Nope.
wow.
Yep. Worked out.
Well, I mean, the experience there too.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
So that's what I was thinking too. It's like, I'm going to trust them because they've done this before and I haven't. So,
yeah, it's a lot of pressure though, isn't it? When people come in the store and they're like, what should I get? And I feel like I'm so like, they're going to have something goes wrong. Oh, that guy at the liquor store told me the total. I ran out or I had too much.
And I think that's why I overbuy, because I would much rather have too much than run out of a particular thing.
Yeah. And a point on that, Kim, you bring up, if you do buy a little extra, make sure you buy something that you like.
Yeah.
I always
Super
tell
smart
people,
idea.
what do you like? Because if you're stuck with it, you can drink it, right? You don't buy something that Uncle Fred, likes and then you don't like it and he doesn't drink that day and now you're stuck with it.
Yep.
Always buy something that you like to enjoy the leftovers.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark and Kim. You can find more information about Mark on his website, franklinliquors.com, and more information about myself at commonwealthwineschool.com. And as always, you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. So our next article is one that I think Mark might have some issues with just because of where he is in the beverage industry. And it's an article from Wine Enthusiast about supermarket wines and how to buy supermarket wines according to sommeliers. So let's see what some of the professionals say about how to buy wine at a supermarket. Now, I know, Mark, you are kind of anti-supermarket wine because you own a wine store and you would much rather that people go to small businesses and buy their wines from someone who has hopefully spent some considerable time choosing the wines on that shelf, as opposed to maybe a larger company dictating what should be out there. So it'd be very interesting to hear your take on this article.
Yeah, I think you're going to be interested in what my feedback is because it's not really that. Of course, I'm biased towards small business, but this article said, and it was in Wine Enthusiast, that these sommeliers are going to tell you, to me, when I heard it, a sommelier is going to tell me the trick of wine in a supermarket. These are very educated wine drinkers, and they did have some tips of what they thought were good things to look for. But I was kind of thinking, tell me more. Like, what's the value? What should I look for on the labels that you see? What's maybe a health tip type of thing? I didn't think it was really an insider thing as much as them boasting, saying that they buy most of their wine at a supermarket. Which did you believe that, Kim, as a sommelier?
No.
Yeah.
Being one, I don't buy my wine at a supermarket.
Honestly, a sommelier is probably getting so much wine at their job that they don't even need to buy any wine, need be it a supermarket or a store.
Well, not necessarily.
They made it sound like they're going here every day and buying their wine to restock up.
Well, I mean, when you're a somm, you might not necessarily have access to taking much home. Even if you taste a lot of wine, it might not be stuff that then your distributors will necessarily, I don't know, leave with you, or that you have empty bottles or open bottles hanging around that you get to bring home from work. I think it depends on particular situations. So that part of it I can kind of see as, okay, you need to do a little wine shopping, just like I need to do a little wine shopping.
Okay, so think of it. This is the other thing I'm looking at. You're talking about shopping. As sommeliers, are they using the supermarket purchase to maintain their tasting skills or their education? Are they going into the supermarket to look for specific wines to help them with training their palate or educating them more?
No, I think they're going in to get a bottle of wine
shopping.
for dinner on Wednesday night.
Just casual, right? And a lot
like
of
you need something to go with your roast chicken on Wednesday, so you're swinging into Trader Joe's and picking up a bottle of wine.
And a lot of them made that comment that they get their quote house wines.
Yeah, it's the Tuesday night wines. That's what I call them. I call them Tuesday night wines.
I call them the relative wines.
Relative wines.
People coming over. But no, so they did say, we go here, we're doing our shopping, we buy our house wines here.
And it was mentioned in the article, and I think that this is a valid point, is that some of it is due to convenience. So if you're grocery shopping anyway, and the
Right.
grocery store
Right.
that you are in has a wine section, then yeah, if you are a wine lover and you can't help yourself and you need to buy a couple of bottles, I mean, that's me at Trader Joe's. I
Right.
don't make it the place that I go to buy 3 cases of wine in any given day. But if I'm there and I want a bottle of sparkling wine from Mimosas on Sunday morning and there's a couple of cheap bottles that are decent house wines, then yeah, I'm going to pick up a few bottles. So I think that is at the heart of this, that it's not necessarily this is where they do all of their shopping, because I think that for people who are somms and who are in the trade and maybe who are studying with other people or maybe who are having dinner with people, there is a bit of show offness, wanting to have nicer bottles when people come over, in which case you probably wouldn't be getting those at the grocery store.
You brought up a good point, though. What you like, you're in Trader Joe's, for instance. There is something about being a wine geek in any store that sells wine and being attracted to a display or something that you just don't see every day. And I think that was one point in this story that they should have, because they had somms from all over the place. Most of them were city-based somms. In the stores, you just look at around our area, the focus in supermarkets usually is pretty different compared to like Trader Joe's to another Shaw's or Big Y. Their selections are different based on their buyers, their corporate buyers, right? Like Trader Joe's selection is different than Shaw's, and Shaw's is different than Big Y. Some focus on their own brands, some focus on big brands, some have a mix of big and small brands. So I think the somms, when they're shopping, they probably get a little excited to see some different things. And they probably don't see a lot of the bigger brands at the places they usually shop.
Right.
So I think that was kind of where it was going. And they did give some good tips, like I said earlier. Kim, did you like any of the tips they gave?
So I
Things
mean,
to
a
look
lot of
for?
the tips were things that we've talked about before, like,
Yeah, there was the ones we covered before, like Spanish value
Spanish,
wines.
Spanish for
Yeah.
good value, or you have a favorite grape variety, try that variety from some other place than you ordinarily drink. Like if you normally drink New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, let's try something from Chile, or let's try
Right.
something from South Africa, that kind of a thing. I think where it's hard, and these articles are hard because this is not easy advice to give. And we do it, or we try to do it all the time, but it's really difficult to give I'm going to give you the one piece of advice that is going to make you instantly a wine expert so that you can
Right,
go shopping
right.
and always buy the perfect bottle of wine. It's
Not
impossible
that
to
easy.
do.
Yeah. That's what I was looking
So,
for.
and I,
From a
yeah,
song.
and I think that it's hard especially for something like this, because like one of theirs was like, go for the private labels. But how are you, the consumer, supposed to know what is
Right.
a private label and what isn't?
They didn't talk about labels. They just said go for the private label.
They go for they say
No
private
detail.
label wines are good value. But how are you supposed to know when you're in Whole Foods that wine on the shelf is a private Whole Foods label and that you're getting better bang for your buck? Like it's a little bit easier at Trader Joe's because they tell you, they tell
Right.
you on the shelf, like exclusive brand, whatever. And for the wholesale clubs like Costco and BJ's, they usually have like their own branded thing. So like Costco is Kirkland. So, if you see Kirkland on the label, that is their private brand. But not everybody probably knows that. Like
Right.
everybody who shops at Costco who buys wine, a lot of those people might not know that Kirkland thing on the shelf is a better value. I think it's good advice, but it's also advice that can have some difficulties.
There was one tip they did give that I don't think we ever talked about it that I thought was a really good thing to point out. And that was the wines in supermarkets that are on the top shelf are top shelf wines. And the wines that are on the bottom or lower shelves are usually what they call the bargains, which we would probably say the inexpensive wines. And it goes by price usually in supermarkets. So
there's a reason why there's the turn of phrase like this is top shelf. Like, well, it's top shelf
Exactly.
because the expensive stuff goes on the top shelf. Yeah.
Exactly.
The jugs
But
go
it's-
on the bottom.
I don't
The
think
good
we've
stuff goes
ever
up top.
talked about that in
Yeah,
the
maybe
past.
we haven't.
And honestly, if I've had times where merchandisers have come into my store and say, "Oh, you need to put this next to this," I'm like, "Why?" Because that's what our marketing says. Our label next to this label will make people pick our label. It's like you don't know what my customers, and besides, I put stuff where where I think it works for. But
Leave my shelves alone.
It's a big thing in the supermarkets. They call it what not rearranging, or I forget what they call it. There's a term for the shelf fronting, how they set it up. In the grocery industry, they pay for those prime spaces.
It's big. It's big business. Absolutely.
But they did mention it in here. So, but overall, I thought.
But I don't know that necessarily tells you where the value is, though. Like,
no, but it's telling on the bottom is usually stuff. If you want to reach for it, go ahead. We don't, we'd rather you reach up and take that Rombauer that's $30 on the top shelf. And putting things at eye level, there's a lot of research towards that as well. But, I was looking for a little bit more. What's the tip? I'm a som, and when I'm in the supermarket, specifically, I look for this. But it just seemed like they just enjoy shopping, and it's convenience, and they buy what they think are just good everyday wines.
But I mean, the research does show us that a lot of people do buy their wine at the grocery store. So I think it is a good idea to give some advice and some direction for that type of buying, because at one point or another, people will be doing it. So
yeah,
even myself,
it's convenient world. I mean, I'm a shopper. I always say that I'm a shopper, and I notice things no matter what it is, any product, because it's all about presentation and how people.
And you love packaging.
What people are putting where and what they're selling is interesting, and in wine, it's just so many levels to it.
Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We are your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lindsay. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. We love to get your questions and comments about the show, so please log on and leave us whatever you'd like to say. You can find us on Franklin Radio 102.9 WFPR, and our past episodes are on SoundCloud and iTunes. Cheers.